Welcome again to this evening's satsang. My name is Gaurav, for those of you who may not know me. And we'll be reading today from the Essence of the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Ananda, as he remembered his Guru's commentary on the Gita. And before I start, I just want to start. This afternoon, as I was kind of preparing for the satsang, it's good to prepare for these things, lest you don't know what to say when the time comes. I was sitting in my balcony and just having a cup of chai, and I was looking up into the sky, and there's a nice canopy of trees just, above where my balcony is. And I was concentrating there, and I saw these, eagles way high up there, just soaring. And I was like, wow, that looks so nice, just that feeling of freedom. Those birds are flying there without a care in the world. Just feels nice. And often also when I go for an evening walk, I just try to, for a few minutes, just look up. Hopefully the path ahead of me is clear, so somebody doesn't knock me off. But in such situations, when I see up for a while, it's very uplifting. And today, as I was doing that, this image came to mind, which is basically that, we hear the traffic outside, and there are cars on the road, and you're sitting in traffic, and somebody's, you're at a red light, people are honking, somebody's shouting, there are beggars, somebody's knocking on your window. It's chaotic. And then, isn't it intuitive that when the traffic becomes at a certain point very crazy, we realize, we need more space. So what do people do on the road? Any engineers out there? It's a simple answer. Great, Prem Das. So people build flyovers, no? Because they're like, we can't solve this, let's fly over this thing, okay? And then what happens? Soon enough, the metro comes in when the flyovers start getting burdened, and even they are above everything else. And finally, what happens? We have airplanes. When it gets totally chaotic, people say, okay, let's just fly over this whole scene altogether. And that's when you enter a plane. And if you've entered a plane, which I'm sure many of you have, for me particularly, it's just beautiful every time. When you sit in a plane, let's say you've come from a day of work or whatever it might be, and you're carrying all your worries with you, you sit in a plane, hopefully you have a window seat, and soon enough, after 15-20 minutes, you start to take off and you go up there, and all of a sudden, what happens? That world you were in, the reality you were in, the traffic jam you were in, the honks, the people shouting, that reality, you can see it as a dot on the surface of the earth. And isn't that freeing? I don't know if you've had that experience, but it's very freeing. One, it's freeing because you're again flying over. You're not in the mess now. You've just flown over the whole thing. The other thing that comes to my mind when I fly like that is you just feel such awe at who would have created all this. That in a flash, just like that, all of our realities, all of our problems, we get perspective. And I think that is what I was seeing when I saw that eagle today. I was like, wow, that guy really has perspective, because we are used to walking with our eyes straight or to the ground, and that's all we see sometimes. But if we can lift our gaze, and that is what we deeply do in meditation, we lift our gaze again for that reason, so that we can go above these problems. And that is how actually the gurus, the great ones, God, that is how they are actually trying to free us from delusion, from this world. What the great ones do is that they say, yes, this world is a mess. Krishna himself said, get away from my ocean of suffering and misery. But then they say, you all have your problems, which I'm sure all of us do, of one kind or another. But the great ones say we cannot fix those for you, because that is the nature of this world. As long as you live, breathe in this world, you'll have those problems. But they say what we can do for you is to lift you up. And that is what happens, that when we start following a spiritual path, what happens is that our circumstances around us, it's good to, I hope we all have that perspective, they don't really change. Or if we are mature enough, we won't wish for them to change, because they will never change actually. And they're unpredictable till the end of our lives. But what we can do is, with the help of a great guru, what we can do is we can start to fly above them. And in that way, we get that perspective. We come out of the traffic, and now we have wings. We have wings of self-realization. We have wings of wisdom. And then it doesn't bother us anymore, because we see it's just a blip on the surface, and we say, oh, that reality, I've left it behind. The trouble as we advanced on the spiritual path, and this is what this is the reading for today, and what I want to talk about, is that as we go through life, even after coming on the spiritual path, as I assume all of us are now, doesn't it happen often that our minds are constantly plagued by problems of one sort or another? How many of you in the room have problems in your life? Please raise your hands. Wow, okay. Any of you are almost there. That's good to know. I'm one of them. But what happens is, when we have all these problems, relationship doesn't work out, we can't make enough money, our health never seems to be right, we want to follow this diet and we can never make it, we have a tendency to sleep too much and we can never control it, we have addictions of one sort of another, and it's like always plaguing us. And this is because the mind, as Krishna says in the Gita, is blind. And in its, you can say, default mode, it looks only at those problems. And there is a story that Yogananda ji used to tell of a man who was troubled by a demon. And this guy was, he went to a wise man and he said, I really want a solution. And this guy said, okay, take this powder, and next time the demon is about to attack you, just chant the mantra and just throw that powder on the demon. So this guy comes back home happy with this powder and, all set to kind of throw this on that demon. But before he can do that, the demon jumps out and he says, ha! Before you could throw that powder on me, I got in the powder myself. Which is to say, Yogananda ji used to say, that the mind that we are trying to overcome is already, you can say, has the disease that we are trying to overcome. So a blind mind can't get out of itself. And that is exactly why when we deal with life, all our problems, we cannot solve them on that same level. You can't reason your way out of your problems. It just doesn't work like that. You have to, and this is a good image to keep in mind, you have to find a way to fly above all of it and just leave it behind. We often say that the masters say they didn't come here to clean our mud puddles, because we are all sitting in, our nice little mud puddles, very comfortable. They've come here to lift us out of it. The mud puddle's still going to be there. And that is how the mind works. And the point I was trying to make was that very often in life, we focus on what we are not doing. Even on the spiritual path, we focus, oh, I didn't do this. I should have meditated, I didn't meditate. My diet is not perfect. I can't wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning. I really want to, because it's supposed to mean something, but I'm not able to do that. Or X, Y, Z, you fill in the blanks. And our mind kind of becomes focused on that to the point that we don't see what we are doing. And that, you can say, actually paralyzes our will. And Master said it's negativity basically, and it takes us down and down further in that mud puddle. But if we can remember often what we can do, rather than not all the things that we are not able to do right now that are beyond our control, if we can just train our mind, what can I do right now in this circumstance with all the imperfections that surround me, I think that is a good starting point. This reading today is from chapter 3, verse 7. That man, however, succeeds supremely, O Arjuna, who disciplines his senses by an effort of mind, remains inwardly non-attached, and engages his organs of activity in God-reminding activities. And I'll just quote some parts of this. Krishna's expression, disciplining his senses by an effort of mind, suggests the importance of not adopting merely outward means of self-discipline. Standing or sitting, for example, with one hand upraised until it withers from disuse. Standing, but never sitting, nor lying down as a mode of penance. Lying on a bed of thorns. These plus long fasts, sleep deprivation, and other means of sense starvation designed for learning self-control. And he says here in the end, for inner freedom, the will must give its active consent to inward release. It is useless to beat the body in an effort to force it into submission. Sense control is never a question of bullying the senses. What must be done is withdraw the energy from them. And do all of us know the technique of Hong Saw here? Or even if you don't, the technique of watching the breath. It's a very simple classical technique. On our path, we have the technique of Hong Saw, which is very simple. The technique is you watch the breath as it comes in and goes out, and you mentally follow it with a mantra, Hong Saw. Now it is very simple, isn't it, to follow Hong Saw in meditation when you're sitting, while we were sitting here for half an hour. Most of the times it's not. And what happens? We've been given this very simple thing. Yogananda ji said, just follow the breath, everything will be fine. That's all you have to do. And instead, what does the mind do? It's thinking of every other thing but the breath. You're planning, you're thinking about the future, about the past, about your problems, of what may come, what may not come. And half an hour is over and you realize you've not done any Hong Saw. But there is a lesson in that, because it mirrors what I was just talking about, that in life also, the same thing happens. We've been actually asked, very fortunately, to do very few things on the spiritual path, positive things. But what happens with us, because of the same mind that we said is diseased already with its problems, the mind goes to things that it cannot do, and it stays there. It does everything but what it's been asked to do. And so, what are the things that we've been asked to do on the spiritual path? Very simple answers. No one can go wrong. Meditate. Sorry? Concentrate. Attend satsangs. Serve. Do your kriyas twice a day. Master said, kriya plus devotion works like mathematics. It cannot fail. He said, if you want to be a master in this lifetime, now that's a big promise. He said, practice Hong Saw for 2 hours every day, in addition to your Kriya practice. He said, devotion is the greatest purifier. He said, love God. He said, if you want to be tuned with me, serve my work. Very simple things. Is it easy to do all of those things? Why? The mind comes in there with its likes and dislikes. I want to do this, but if this, that, and the other thing. But if we can really train our minds to focus on, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Everything else can wait. I just want to do this. One thing at a time. Start with things which you can do. Don't beat yourself about things which are too big to tackle right now, like Swami says. And in this regard, I want to tell a few stories about disciples of Yogananda ji. Like you and me, I won't take the example of his highest disciples, but I'll take the example of a few disciples who had their fair share of problems, just like you and me. But the point I want to illustrate is that they did not focus on those defects. And in fact, Yogananda ji didn't even ask them to focus on those defects. So let that be a lesson to us, not similarly to focus on them or judge ourselves that, oh, I have this defect, I'm worthless. So one story is, I don't know if you know, but there was a disciple of Yogananda ji who was an alcoholic. And he was addicted to alcohol to the point that after he got Kriya initiation, he was very sweet. He used to sit there with his Kriya malas in one hand to, count his Kriyas, and with a glass of whiskey in the other hand. And he would do a few Kriyas, and then he would take a sip of whiskey. And other disciples, kind of almost lost. They said, what are you doing? This is blasphemy. And he said, I just can't help it. This is how I am. So on went this, game of him doing his kriyas and taking his whiskey sips. And apparently, I think Yogananda ji didn't say anything to him because he allowed him to continue. He obviously knew what he was doing. But to the point that one day the man said, I felt so much joy from my practice that he said midway between my meditation practice, I just lay that bottle down. And he said, I never touched it again. There was a lady disciple of Yogananda ji's who was 80 when she met him. This was in the state of Washington, and Yogananda ji at that time used to lecture the country. So apparently he met her on one of his lecture tours, and she was 80, a time when most of our lives are finished, we are, done with. And to add to this, she was an atheist all her life. She did not believe in God or any of that. Master said that upon meeting him, she had a transformation and she took up the practice of meditation. And he said whenever she was not meditating, she would play a recording of his voice, which was a chant called God, God, God. And he said she would do these two things. And he said, in the few years that she had, which I imagine were not many, he said she found final liberation. Now, isn't that an inspiring story? That lady could have, if you put yourselves in her shoes, could have very easily said, I'm 80, my life is gone. I haven't believed in God all my life. It's pretty hopeless. I don't even live in his ashram. I don't have any satsang. He's never going to see me again. What's the point of all this? When the mind takes over. But instead, she did those few things. She meditated, she kept the Guru in mind, and she found God. There's another story of Horace Gray, who was a spastic. He was a very simple monk in Yogananda ji's ashram, who had a very childlike simplicity and devotion. And Yogananda ji of him said that he will get there in this life. He said God is very pleased with his devotion. Again, just to say, Yogananda ji didn't cure him of his illness, of this flaw that he had, of this great challenge that could seem to other people. Instead, he just said, keep on with what you're doing. And through that simple thing, Horace found his freedom. There's also a story of Amelia Gali-Gurchi. She was a world-renowned opera singer, again a devotee of Yogananda ji. And she also, one time somebody asked him, how is she doing? And he said, she's soaring in God. That's all he said. But just to also relate that she had a husband, she was married twice. But first she had a husband who was very, very aggressive. And at times when he used to get violent, he used to beat her. And one day, in a rage of violence, he picked up a chair to throw at her. But by that time, she was on the spiritual path, and she just looked at him very, very sternly, and he put the chair back down. And she said she walked out of his life at that very moment. And Master relates, then she found her twin, soul, who was again a devoted disciple of Yogananda ji. Why am I telling these stories? Just to share, just to illustrate this point, that problems, challenges, exist for everyone on this plane. They will never go, but we have within our power to either focus on the things that we've been asked to do or to focus on everything else. You may be addicted to something, you may sleep 16 hours a day, you may have the worst diet in the world, you may have whatever you may have. Forget about it. Can you love God enough was what Yogananda ji asked of. Can you do enough of the things he asked of? Can you love God, like he said? What does that mean? He said that is, you can say, our secret mantra. He said, if you can love something, isn't it true when you love somebody, a child or a spouse or a dog, whatever it might be, when you love them, you're just with them and you can't think of anything else but them. And Master said, if you can love God with that love, he said, nothing can touch you. And that's what happened for all these disciples, that their love was so pure after a while that nothing touched them. And so let's focus on the things that we can do. He said, chanting is half the battle. Let's dive deep into chanting. What does it mean? How do we chant? How do we sing to God? How do we call to the beloved? He said, devotion. What does it mean? Let's go in that direction rather than all the things that are wrong with our life. When I started on the spiritual path, I took the other approach, which is I think many of us take, which is the outside-in approach, which is to see the outward symbols, like Swami was saying, of the spiritual path, of renunciation. You have to do all these things. I think the mind likes that complexity. Let's get up at 4 a.m., have this strict diet, attend all these things. And that didn't really work. That didn't really change anything out in my life outwardly. But when after a while, after suffering, as we often learn, I said, that's not working. Let me try the other approach, which is the inside out approach. And when I started doing some of these things, I said, let me meditate 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, twice a day. Let me see what this chanting business is all about. Let me love God. Then to my amazement, I noticed that within a few months, as opposed to years, within a few months, the things that I had earlier tried to change, whatever it might be, it just happened automatically. And one day I just realized, wow, I'm already doing these things. I didn't put my mind there and I'm already doing them. So that is the message that Yogananda ji brings us, and that we focus on the positive, focus on the essentials, forget about the things that don't matter in life. He said, as long as you're trying to make a sincere effort, he said, God will never let you down. Thank you.